Shoot, sorry.
It's
What
okay.
happened? Go back. Where is it? There it is. Okay, sorry.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited to have Jen here talking about regulation in pet care. I think it's going to be an extremely interesting and engaging conversation. Jen has been a long time pivotal member of the pet care industry. I've seen her at trade shows for years and years, and just 2 weeks ago, we were at Hershey, Pennsylvania for the Pet Boarding and Daycare Expo together, and her booth was right across from mine, and it was packed the whole time. There was a line of people, which worked great for me because while they were waiting to talk to Jen, they would come over and talk to me. So I loved it. But she's immensely popular. She's incredibly knowledgeable, and I am so glad that we have her here to talk to you guys. So, without further ado, thank you so much, Jen. I'm so glad that you're here.
Well, thank you very much. My gosh, intro like that. I hope I don't disappoint.
No.
So won't waffle or take any time. Just going to jump straight into. So the point today is to talk about legislation. And for those of you that follow and are a little bit more in tune with what's going on, I apologize. Going to start at a very basic level. Look at the big picture. So what's happening with legislation pretty much around the world. This is very, very relevant right now in the U.S. and in Canada, but Europe is a couple stages ahead of us, and so when we in North America look at what's on the horizon for us, it is a really good idea to look at what's over the horizon, and what's going on in Europe is some of the things that are happening. And so I want to then talk about what the process looks like. So when legislation comes, how does it get developed? Where are the points when those of us within pet care, where can we influence that process? Because there's only a few windows where we get involved in the game. And even though we are, at the end of the day, we're the ones delivering it, but to influence those policies that are going to define how we are able to conduct our business, we have a couple of windows. I want to then look at a few key regions. I'll explain why those states and provinces really kind of stand out and why they're something that we need to pay attention to and learn from. And then I'm just going to give you some key action points of what each of us as professionals within the pet care industry, what can we do to stay ahead of the game, to keep our businesses agile and able to respond to what is about to happen to us. So, first, let's look at what's happening. So, the overall direction is that it's moving from local municipalities and county towards state and province wide licensing and inspection. That's important for a number of reasons. One of the biggest ones, Beth and I sort of alluded to just prior to us starting this discussion, and that is about the influence then that the state and the experience that the state has looking at shelters, looking at facilities, and starting to apply some of those standards down to the boarding industry, daycare industry as well, even training. Fire life safety standards, been a lot of horror stories in the news. And so, as such, that is both a driver and a result of what has gone on. So, that's something that all of the legislation pretty much pays attention to. Staff training and ratios. This is something that we have seen in a couple of states now. We've seen it in Colorado, Iowa, and in North Carolina, notably. That is it. Every bit of legislation that is, I would say, second generation has staff training and ratios. Mandatory incident and injury reporting, both for the pets and for people. And this is a really big one here, the clear consumer notices, informed consent. That is a big one that has a lot of legal ramifications. So your contracts, your wording, but it's not just about contracts and wording, because as we all know, you can't completely indemnify uh, inadvertent negligence, etc. You can't indemnify yourself from that. There's always a legal way around that. So these clear consumer notices and informed consent are going to continue to play a much bigger part in what we're doing. So if we look at the mechanics of legislation, so pets are family, they're no longer just a dog. For most of us, that's our ideal client. Myself and an awful lot of people in the industry, that's why we're in it. Actually, as pet parents, we're in this industry because we don't see them as just a dog. They're for a family. And so what tends to happen is there's a trigger incident. With those trigger incidents, it hits the news, it's in the paper. Even if it's not in the news or it's in the paper, you'll have an individual who has had that horror story. And most of us would agree that those horror stories that have hit the news and that we hear about have us saying at the same time, there should be regulation, there should be rules, there should be safeguards. The big thing to remember is that that trigger incident doesn't have to happen in your locality. The state of New York, in their legislation that they have just tabled, they cited two incidents that were the reason why the justification, so the pretty flowery speech before the bill of why it is that all of these lawmakers should be sitting down and paying attention to this issue. They cited one local, very public incident, and the second incident they cited actually took place in Virginia. So it doesn't have to happen in your state. It's happening, doesn't have to happen in your province. It's happening in your country. It's happening in your neighboring country. It will be used as an example as to why new legislation is needed. So that trigger incident, there's an outcry. What will then happen is that an elected official will then sponsor a bill, and they will present that bill to their legislative body. That bill will then be referred to usually a sitting committee. So depending upon the nature of the bill, they will refer to the relevant committee. So an example would be in the state of New York, the Safe Pet Boarding and Act. That bill was tabled. And part of that bill, what that bill was saying was that the Department of Agriculture and Markets should be the body in charge of this. And so that bill then gets referred to the sitting Agriculture Committee. So the committee will go over the bill. Potentially, it will meet. It will take input amongst their committee members. Some of them may reach out to their community, but they will decide then on what the final draft wording of that bill should be that they're going to actually present to the voting body, whether it's Senate, whether it's a provincial, for voting to adopt as law. So once it is law, it is then put into the hands of the designated department. So what we're seeing around North America is that departments of agriculture are being cited as the part of state or provincial administration that would be given control over, say, pet boarding and daycare. So that bill now giving the authority to that department is now law. And at that point in time, internally within that department, draft policy and regulations will be written. Now, there are professional draft policy writers. These will be wordsmiths. These will be legal departments. They are adept at, and their job and role is to write these draft policy and regulations for the entire department and sometimes across departments within state or provincial level. They can reach out and look at inviting professionals who might know more about the area that they're writing draft policy on. They don't have to, but of course, most are going to. So they're going to reach out to professionals. This stage of the game is by invitation only. And in fact, back when it was up in the Senate or in the province, was also by invitation only. So that is about somebody reaching out to who they see as the professional who can give them guidance and feedback on what they're writing. So that's invitation only. Once that draft policy is written, then it will be published to a registry. So that's a formal process within the department where it becomes public. And that will trigger a public consultation period. That public consultation period, 45 days in the state of New York. It was 32 days, weird number, in the province of Ontario. And so that is an opportunity then for pet parents, for anybody within the industry, any member of the public, anybody, to provide their feedback. Now, those who are considered to have more weight during that feedback will continue to be those that they recognize as professionals. Potentially, they will make adjustments and revisions once they come up with a final version that they are happy with. It will be adopted as rule. It's now law, it's regulations. And it's at that point that committees and stakeholder groups will be invited to finalize the adoption and the enforcement, i.e., they would turn around and they potentially would look at daycare providers and pet boarding providers to come and be part of these committees to say, okay, so how are we going to enforce it? What's it going to look like? How does this make sense? So if we look at the mechanics of legislation, there's two sections where it's by invitation. They have to recognize you as the professional. Now, the people who are going to make those invitations are generally, if we look at within the department, the policy writers, these are lawyers, these are credentialed individuals. And if you do an informal survey, if you were to go and speak to lawmakers, government bodies, speak to people who aren't you, who aren't your staff, who aren't your colleagues, who don't work in our industry, and you ask the question, who are the professionals with the knowledge of pet care? And across our country, across North America, we are going to see that they will respond veterinarians. And we see this in legislature all the time. So they're going to refer to veterinarians. Now, when we think about the Department of Agriculture, they already employ veterinarians. So a number of seats at that table that is writing that draft policy will be taken up by employed state veterinarians who, as a matter of course and rule, are dealing with contamination, outbreaks, investigations, agriculture, etc. So seats will already be taken up at the table there, if it is a table. So if we look at a few states and we look at how this is rolled out. So one of the things to understand, we hear an awful lot of people talk about Ollie's Law right now in Massachusetts. One of the things for people to understand is that Ollie's Law has passed. It's there. It's been in effect since December of 2024. Because what the law was that they just asked to give the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture and Resources the authority to write statewide rules for commercial boarding and training kennels, including dog daycares. Massachusetts actually went so far as to say, even when it's run from a private residence. So the law was just giving the authority. So that's an important thing to understand, is that those laws will pass, that will happen, and then the next stage, it's not actually your voting representatives who are going to pass or not pass. It's going to be government employees of that department who are going to pass or not pass. So in Massachusetts, they were told to develop standards that would cover licensing, inspections, staff to dog ratios, fire and emergency planning, injury reporting, group size and supervision. So that's relevant to daycare, minimum housing and care, training requirements for kennel and daycare staff. That's a loaded one. Insurance and consumer education. Fortunately, Massachusetts did form a committee to establish those rules. So what has happened is they do have a committee with we have a couple of PACCC certified professionals, so recognized within the industry as being professionals in pet care, the IBPSA as the trade association, plus a vast number of others involved, representatives of animal shelters, ASPCA, et cetera, who are on that committee, who are establishing those draft rules. They've been doing it for a year. They establish rules. They go open for scrutiny. They go back into committee to work on those rules. That's incredibly important because it's so much easier. We know this from our own customers, so much easier to form a good opinion than it is to change someone's opinion. So when policy gets written in the absence of those of us who actually then have to live it, it's really difficult for us to then change their minds. They've worked really long and hard to establish and put together something. So why change it? You have to be incredibly diligent, and you have to come up with some awfully good reasons as to why they should abandon their first chat. So another one to look at is New York. That was just tabled at the end of September. So it's the Safe Pet Boarding Act, a proposal to grant the Department of Agriculture licensing of all commercial boarding facilities, including doggy daycare businesses. It's currently very broad, and it would give the Department of Agriculture the authority to write rules as may be necessary. So it leaves it wide open for rules governing whatever topics they deem necessary now and can be added in the future, i.e., the rules will not have to go through a lawmaking process. The law, if it passed, will be that the Department of Agriculture makes those decisions. Draft policy. So what will happen with a lot of these bills is they will give a bit of a guideline. So they'll say, and some of the things that this department, when it writes its rules, should look at. And so New York have said that it should include ventilation, space, water and temperature control, emergency planning, and incident reporting. We're seeing this one again, staff training and supervision ratios, record keeping, vaccination verification, veterinary supervision, and sanitation. Veterinary supervision. What does that mean? So we have seen in some provinces here in Canada where it's been required that you have a relationship with a local vet, and that was deemed to be veterinary supervision. The state of Arkansas, it has died in committee, but a very involved bill, it was very poorly written, was tabled, and it actually wanted to, right there in the bill level, mandate that daycare, boarding, and grooming parlors of a certain size needed to employ veterinarians. So that's huge. That's alarming. It did die in committee in Arkansas, but that veterinary supervision, if we don't have people from within the industry actually involved in making those rules, what is that going to look like? And of course, licensing and mandatory facility inspections. So what New York is proposing, pretty standard. We're seeing it across the way. Maine. So this already happened. And so in the state of Maine, What they did was they reclassified hobby kennels as commercial animal care facilities. It was fast tracked and it was passed in June of this year. So, realistically, well, what does that mean? Well, this sort of speaks to the idea we see this all around North America, where depending upon your region, depending upon what the rules were, etc., you have these different licenses, different rules that were established based on the needs and the evolution of the business or the industry within that locality. And so in Maine, you had a statewide level of standards. Those standards were applied for those that went for state licensing. And those that went for state licensing tended to be things like the ASPCA, larger rescues and shelters, those who were going for contracts with the state for isolation or quarantine kenneling, etc., things like that. And so then at the local level, you had an awful lot who didn't bother going for state licensing. They licensed as a hobby kennel because in their municipality or their county was perfectly happy to say, no, 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 you're a hobby kennel. There's some very large, very well established businesses that in other states and in other areas would never have been called hobby kennels, but it was just a technicality of licensing. They fast tracked and they took that away. So now in the state of Maine, that statewide licensing and inspection system that they have in place and those standards now apply to everybody. So it essentially brings the state in as the overseer and regulator. It closed a previously existing back door, but that back door wasn't necessarily one that anybody at the local level saw as being abusive. It just was one of those weird little things that you deal with on a local level. It's an example where you can't rely on having a good relationship with your mayor. I hear that one an awful lot. Oh, no, no, no. Our mayor, he loves us. He's a client of ours. We don't have any problems whatsoever. Yeah, we don't have enough land for the current bylaws or the current rules, but that's okay. Our inspector really, really likes us. That's a good thing to do and good thing to have, foster that relationship, keep that relationship, but you can't rely on it because when it gets pulled away from them and it goes up to the state or the province level, those relationships, they might buy you time, but they won't exclude you. Texas. Texas is interesting because of it's showing a trend, very individual, with individual statutes that they've tried to put in place in Texas that are now being included in the broader umbrella of New York, Massachusetts, and all of these other states. And that is the informed consent law. So in 2023, Texas law requiring kennels to obtain informed consent, it went into effect. It requires kennels to clearly disclose risks, conditions, and get informed consent from pet owners, especially around unsupervised or off-leash group activities relating to liability for the loss, injury, or death of a domestic animal. So this is incredibly important because it means that if you have a practice that you feel confident in maybe how you structure your play groups, or you are confident with the numbers that you run, anything, if as a result of any of those conditions, something could happen, because let's be honest, these are dogs, something could happen, then you have to actually outline that, explain that, and you have to get written consent from the parents to go ahead with doing that. So you have to say, this is how many dogs we put in an area per staff. Or this is how we construct our play groups. We will do mixed size, or we will mix ages, or et cetera, et cetera. So you have to explicitly get that informed consent, because if you don't have that informed consent and there is an incident, and it's a perfectly understandable things happen incident, if the exact circumstances that happened weren't outlined in your informed consent, you could be liable. Texas further exacerbated, they further attempted to exacerbate it by in 2025. And a lot of you may have heard this because there was a bit of an outcry. It was a bit of a last minute outcry because I think this one snuck through or under the radar of a lot of people because it was actually part of the Civil Practices and Remedies Code. So it wasn't strictly speaking, it was specifically aimed at kennels, but because it wasn't Department of Agriculture, because it wasn't about accommodation, it wasn't about safety, etc., it took a while for people to actually pick up that this was happening. And what they were trying to do was create explicit liability rules for kennels and animal shelters. And they were defining a kennel as any facility that boards or holds domestic animals overnight for compensation. So, classic boarding, board and train, some camp style daycares with overnights. Strictly speaking, it would potentially, any of our pet sitters or home operators out there would potentially have been affected by this. And what this was explicitly said was that owners would be able to sue when their pet is lost, injured, or dies in the facility's care. And they named mental and emotional suffering of both the pet and the parent, regardless of intent. So this laid out there accidents,
So,
negligence. Yeah,
so a person could say, my dog came back upset, and they would have grounds to sue?
potentially, potentially. So they would have to the interpretation, right? Everything would have to be would have to be tested in law to see what held up and what worked.
Yeah.
But the intention behind this Civil Practices and Remedies Code would be that the mental and emotional suffering of the pet would count as well as that of the parent. One of the examples that they gave was that a pet parent, whilst searching for their pet, injures themselves, you would be liable for that pet parent's injury because it was a result of the loss of their pet.
Wow.
So essentially, nulling and negating all the original statutes that protected pet care businesses, i.e., the chattel laws. Chattel laws are being challenged constantly. There, we are starting to see, and we're seeing cases where the chattel laws are being abandoned. And so, you speak to the legal profession, and they're, most of the ones that I've spoken to, obviously I'm not, can't speak for them all, but the ones that I have spoken to have said that, yeah, it is something that is falling and is starting to go away, but enshrining it in civil practice and a remedies code, enshrining it in law that these are things to take into consideration, that fast forwards and speeds and lays it wide open. So that's one of the reasons why Texas, now it did actually die in committee in April. So a lot of that wording went and everything went back to the relevant committee in Texas, and it is listed as died in committee, so it's dead. So for them to revisit that, something new would have to be written, would have to go through the process before getting it to committee. But it is an example of where we have to pay attention and we have to keep our eyes out. It's not just going to be the Department of Agriculture, and it's not just going to be the obvious things that we think of, which is the buildings, the literal safety of the pets, the behavior, the staffing. It's not necessarily going to come from that direction. It can come from consumer practices and consumer protections. Ontario. So I put Ontario in here. I don't know how many Canadians are on here. This is an example of where things are. So in Ontario, we're a little bit behind the game. And what I mean by that is we had a system in place and it was no longer manageable. The Ontario Society of Protection of Cruelty to Animals was actually who was given the powers by our government, so for the entire province, so our version of a state, to enforce the local bylaws and the overall province-wide standards for pet care. The OSPCA walked away from that a number of years ago, put their hands up and said, yeah, we don't want to do that anymore. And so suddenly the province was left with, oh my gosh, we have to try to do this. And in doing that, realize that at the provincial level, things are very fragmented. And so they're cracking on putting in place framework. This is an example where, Beth, you had said that, Kuranda beds with a lot of their different products are being promoted and in fact are meeting standards for some of these state regulations because like your cat tower is impermeable. It's not made of wood. And so that's some of the regulations that are being put in place at a state level for those state funded or state sponsored or state employed facilities and shelters. And so what happened here in Ontario was they put together shelter standards for service providers housing animals. And the standards were broken into 3 facility type categories. We had companion animals and zoological companion animals, so basically pets. We had equine and farm animals, and then we had zoo animals and captive wildlife. Sections of the draft address looked at facility, shelter, i.e. holding housing, animal care management, and operations. There was a huge outcry because the wording was deemed, and some of the feedback that we got was that this was going to be applied to pet boarding and to daycare. And it has been determined that the draft is phrased as service providers housing animals in the care of or taken into custodial care under the Government Act, so by the Animal Welfare Society. So, but where this is important is that when we look at these standards and what they're proposing from a business perspective, they're very heavily facility based. And it's an awful lot about construction. It's an awful lot about ventilation. It's an awful lot about light, about physically what you have. And so there's nothing within the draft. It is only a draft, but there's nothing that addresses timeline, that addresses adoption. And of course, it's very heavily favored or very heavily leaning towards, seized animals, sick animals, where we don't know contagion, etc. So different circumstances that may not be applicable and may not be necessary for a business focusing on taking care of and housing documented healthy pets. But we have received word that the draft has gone back and they're reworking the wording, and that the plan is to take out that this is an act for those in custodial care, i.e., this would be for boarding and daycares. So there's some pretty onerous and there's some pretty restrictive rules and guidelines in there that would require an awful lot of businesses. And in Ontario, leased facilities, that's not a big thing here. People own the buildings, people own the property. And this would mean bulldozing and starting over potentially. So it's another example where be careful. Don't react once it's written. Be a part of when it's being written. New Jersey is one to watch. There's no comprehensive statewide kennel or daycare oversight yet. It's very local licensing and zoning. But the reason to watch New Jersey is because New Jersey has, as demonstrated here, 3 times now, they've gotten involved at the state level for a very specific item pertaining to pet boarding and daycare. So 2016, they loosened the law for outdoor service rules. They were banning and they were saying that facilities could not have artificial turf outside, which for any of us that have discovered artificial turf and the joys, oh my God, please do not make me get rid of my artificial turf. And why? And so everybody band together to work on taking care of that. But that was New Jersey demonstrating that it's perfectly happy to come into the area on a per item basis. Just this month, November 6th, a bill was tabled that would require video monitoring in pet shops, grooming facilities, and pet daycare centers. And so it specifically listed pet daycare centers, which is something that we are starting to see more and more of. It tends to be pet boarding, and daycare is sort of off to the side, but more and more of them are listing the pet daycare centers. It's currently in committee. 2024, it went into 2025. There was a bill to license dog trainers. It was pulled after strong opposition, but the key component to understand about that was that it would have been standardized testing that met the standard of the board. So they wanted to put in place a state board that would license dog trainers in the state of New Jersey. I don't believe, certainly from the feedback that I've got from local people, that this is a dead. The wording as it stands is, has been put down, has been pulled, but that just means it's been pulled. That doesn't mean that it's dead. It means that stakeholders got involved and more consultation has to take place.
Do you know, was the opposition to having trainers be licensed, or was it to having essentially the state deciding how dog trainers should train?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah. So the issue with the licensing was that the board would then decide, and there was a lot of debate as to, well, what would they accept as training and association. And as we know, in the training world, there is that divide between, and I don't mean to be derogatory when I say quote unquote, balanced trainers, and those who are 100% positive reinforcement. And that is really where a lot of it fell down. Trainers as a whole were the group who sat back and who said, no, 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 no. This isn't going to work, because how is the board going to handle that process? And there was an awful lot of concern by who would make up that board.
Mm-hmm. There's two different philosophies there.
Absolutely. So a mixture of the philosophies, and because the training side of things, really did fall down to practice versus physical. It was a tough one. It was interesting and it's interesting, New Jersey, that was put forth before statewide kennel and daycare, etc. rules. It really tends to, elsewhere, what we've seen that it's been the facilities and it's been the day-to-day general operations, density per square foot, staff ratios, ventilation, noise control, client communication. All of that has happened first. And then you've started seeing the focus on training and practice and education, and eventually board certify. And if we look at other industries, that's the way it's gone. If we look at childcare, right? Childcare definitively, first it started with numbers. It was all about numbers. It was about safe environment, safe buildings, just the day-to-day safety. And then they started getting into, okay, well, who's doing the child care and started leaning into early childhood education. And really, the last step of the process was that board certifying the people. Mm-hmm. So New Jersey is interesting because they went in there first before actually putting the statewide across the facilities and across when those trainers keep the pets, etc. So it's one to watch because they are willing to talk about legislation for the industry. And so at some point in time, they're going to do what New York, Massachusetts, and everywhere has done. And they're going to get that law in place that says, okay, this is who writes the rules. Mm-hmm. And then makes it just that little bit easier to then write the rules. Mm-hmm. So a couple of other watch states, Washington, protecting cats and dogs by requiring kennels to meet certain fire safety standards. It's an interesting one. This one has actually, it died in the 2024 session. It died in committee. My understanding was that they were just looking that every kennel building that houses animals to have at least one working fire alarm or sprinkler system with certification via the business license process. And it died in committee. There's a lot of talk as to, well, why did it die in committee? I believe some of it may have been the argument over the fire alarm or sprinkler system. There's a lot of controversy around sprinkler systems and whether or not, they are a process to save life or whether they're actually just a process to save property. So feedback that I had, which is purely anecdotal, was that it was the word or that had that die. There have been a couple very high profile fire incidents in Washington. So, something more will come. The question will be, will it be an individual safety item like this, or will they go for statewide and add that as a rule? Kansas, 2022 bill to tighten rules on kennels and breeders. It died in committee. And then the Kansas Pet Animal Advisory Board, considered beefing up boarding and daycare rules after a fatal incident at a facility. In the end, they chose education enforcement of existing rules rather than putting in new regulations. But the issue now puts the state, the state is watching. And if they can't, under the existing legislation, get the rules that they want for protection, then they will write. Virginia is another one. They also decided to use their existing laws that they have to allow for new rule writing. And so a statewide committee on implementing rules and what those rules will look like has been formed. So there will be a lot of states that have either dormant policy or they have something there that they realize, hey, we don't actually have to do this first part of the process. We can just do some editing. Mature policy. So there's a couple of states that we need to look at. So Colorado's a watch state for two reasons. It for a very, very long time has had regulations that talked about cage dimensions. Well, hate that word. Worker to dog ratios. They require that license holders be trained, among other provisions. That's one of those gray areas because, what constitutes as training? Right? We know when we start talking about PACCC certification that we have a lot of people who will sit back and look at things that they currently hold and will say, oh, well, I'm certified. Are you certified or did you get a certificate? And how easy is it to prove the training that constituted the awarding of a certificate? Was it attendance, etc.? So that's an interesting one that Colorado has. Colorado is currently looking at sunsetting. So it's looking at some of its regulations and wondering whether or not they're no longer relevant and whether they're get rid of some of those. And that is something that the IBPSA is actively working with Colorado on to make sure that they don't accidentally get rid of ones that could be good and just haven't been implemented. Iowa is considered to have mature policy, detailed record keeping, cleanliness rules for kennels, dog daycare. it very early on had that owners must sign a waiver acknowledging the inherent risks of group housing. So not necessarily group play, but of group housing. North Carolina. We all talk about North Carolina because, of course, staff ratios. Now, it's interesting that it's currently at 10 to 1. Initially, it was tabled as 15 to 1, so 15 dogs to one staff member. My understanding is that that's building. They have rules about informed consent for non-related dogs. And so non-related dogs cannot share accommodation overnight. Um, it's also really interesting that North Carolina rules apply to the in-home setting where services are advertised. So it does apply to pet sitters. We're not seeing enforcement as much in North Carolina as we are for the facilities, but that is a state that is cited by a lot of other states as having legislation as being a good framework and guide. And then, of course, along with there's some old California laws that are sometimes cited as examples. California is a watch state. The reason California is a watch state, not I don't think because of its mature policy, but because of the number of class action lawsuits. So there have been a couple. There was one in particular, a franchise, 14 locations across California, that was cited in a class action lawsuit against the facility operators. So because of those, that makes us pay a lot of attention to California because those trigger incidents, those are exactly what make people realize, uh-oh, we got to do something. So what can you do? So one of the first things is you have to be recognized as the professional in pet care. And professional, there's a lot of, what is the official definition of professional? Well, professional is receiving payment for services. So this is not a hobby. You do this as your profession. How does the public, how do the government, how does everybody else look or think of when they think of a professional? They look for third-party certification. Your clients don't hire an electrician that isn't board certified. So being third-party certified, so that is not the certificate that you receive at the end of the really excellent training that you did, because it's the people who provided you the training that are giving you that certificate. That training is fantastic, and that training is the basis of acquiring the knowledge that you're going to need to sit down and take that third-party exam, because the third-party exam can't give you training, right? You sit the bar exam to become a lawyer. The bar isn't the one that put your training course together and educated you. So it has to be third party. So third party certification gives that credibility to government, to lawmakers, to elected officials, to the pet parents, that you do know what you should know. So be recognized. Be active with your trade association. So monitor IBPSA newsletters. Be vocal, right? Give the feedback to your trade association about what's going on, what you need them to do, get them to interact. The IBPSA newsletters have a really good legislative monitor that can let you know what's going on. If they miss something locally in your area, please let them know so that it can get on their radar. But also think outside the box. If your business is, if you are more of a shelter, if you're a charity, you're a foster, then there's the different associations for shelters. Be active with that association. If there is a way, I'm just staring at my typo, I'm so sorry. If there's a way or part of your business, there is an affinity, there's a fit for the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, then be active with them. Also, don't forget business. So there's going to be different business groups that are associations that represent you. So whether it's emerging businesses, whether it's in Ontario and across Canada, we have the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. And so they're an association, a trade association that represent all businesses, because a lot of this legislation can be argued, if poorly worded and poorly implemented, would indeed restrict your ability to do business. And so those organizations can be very active in giving you advice. Identify yourself with local and state provincial representatives. So don't wait for the legislation to be written. Get third party certified and then announce yourself to your elected officials. Let them know, hey, this is what I did. I didn't have to. I stepped forward and I did this because I'm a professional in my industry. Wanted to let you know that there are good operators in your state, in your county. If something comes in statewide and you were previously policed or inspected or licensed at a local level, that local authority can obviously help you when it comes time for those statewide things to be put in place, because they can communicate that both to you and back upwards about what is going on, what those limitations might be, etc. So identifying yourself with local, absolutely a good idea to do. When something is identified, so when you get that alert, write those letters to the sponsors of the bill. So those senators, those assemblymen who have put together that bill that's been tabled, write them, the people that authored it, and write the members of the standing committees within government. And if you can't get the names, because some standing committees don't share the names of the elected officials who sit on them, but they always will share the chair. So the chair of those standing committees is always public, regardless of the state. So write those individuals and write the legal counsel for the relevant government department. And didn't put it in here, but reach out to PAC. If you're certified, reach out to PAC so that we can write local government and we can tell them, hey, this is what PAC is. This is what it means. This is why these people are special. And this is why they should be part of devising your policy. Moving a little bit away from, actually writing the rules and the laws, do not rely on grandfathering. Think of the state of Maine. Do not rely on grandfathering. I had a lot of conversations, a lot of great people just a couple of weeks ago when I was at Hershey with Beth, and a lot of others that were there. And I had so many people sitting in front of me saying, yeah, you know what? Yeah, it's fine. I can go bigger. I can do this. Mayor really loves us, or our local inspector loves us. Do not rely on grandfathering. Grandfathering is a principle and it's not actually a legal protection. So if you are currently grandfathered for anything, business wise, zoning wise, bylaw wise, then go and speak to a lawyer about what is the legal documentation, what is it called in your jurisdiction that both documents and enshrines legally your right to be in business. In my province in Ontario, it's called a letter of legal non-compliance. So basically, it acknowledges the fact that I am not compliant with current regulations, but I am legal because, and it states why it is that I am legal. So I'm legally non-compliant. Get that legal documentation. Do not rely on grandfathering, because elected officials change. And if you currently have local laws and local rules, then those can change, and they can change on the whim of Sarah, who really loves dogs and who would never in a million years take her dog to one of those facilities. So we have people out there who intrinsically, inherently just think the idea of a boarding or a daycare facility is wrong. And those can be the people who can put you out of business. Plan and budget. If you have a plan, even if it's a 10-year one, to save and modify, say your ventilation or your fire suppression or whatever, document your plan and get started. Because if we look at everything that is out there and everything that's being tabled, that's the direction it's going to go. End of. So your long-term plan is going to have to be to improve these types of things. Long-term planning, accept that numbers of staff to pets will be an issue. It's just a fact. I'm sorry, but it is. If we look around the country, those ratios are being put in place. Start working towards it. Spoke to a gentleman who does an awful lot of training for the industry. He was asking, he says, where do you think? My personal opinion of where I think it's going to go. I'm not saying that I think that this is what it has to be. It's just we've seen too many regions adopt it. It is apparently considered, definitely best practice across the industry without putting a lot of codicils in place that, 15 to 1. That looks like where it's going. This gentleman, was critical of the 15 to 1 because he said, you know what? I know confidently that I can safely do 18 to 1. But as he said, he goes, but you know what? He says, I'm happy to do my 18 to 1. And if the law changes, it's not that big of a leap. I can go from 18 to 15. So if you're at 50 to 1, the law will not be in your favor. So start working now on creating a business model that will get you there at some point. If you have a plan in place, if you can show something documented, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're working towards. This is why we're like this now. And this is what we're going to work towards. Then those local representatives who are positive and who are on your side can help make the case for an adoption timeline when that legislation comes in over top of you. Ever so quickly, PACCC mission. PACCC is to bring in independent testing and certification to the pet care industry. It's independent certification. It's an important step because our industry and our, we know every time we open up any kind of, industry magazine, consumer report, et cetera, it's rapidly growing. It's multiplying. It's a pretty easy to enter industry, whether it's a home-based operation, whether it's leased premises, what have you. And it's an industry that's frequently damaged by news reports of serious pet accidents and deaths. And so most of us are sitting back saying, well, we need legislation. So we do need legislation. Independent testing and certification, that is how you get to prove to everybody right now, ahead of time, that you are not the scary, you know what you're supposed to know, you abide by a code of ethics and morals, you are that professional already without these rules being necessary. Professionals that pass stringent testing, which reflects a broad-based knowledge of animal care, so it's not about your specific procedures, it's about the knowledge required to provide safe and conscientious animal care. You abide by the Humane Pet Care Statement. Those individuals will be certified and entitled to use the relevant post-nominals of CPACP or CPACM or CPACO after your name. So that public and official recognition that you are a professional. And to put it into context, when you are sitting down with your vets, when you're sitting down with your lawyers, when you're sitting down with others who society recognizes and gives them credit, what makes that individual a vet? It's not the years of university and veterinary college that they did. That because when they come out the other side of that, they've got a piece of paper that says they studied veterinary medicine and they studied to be a vet. But what makes them a vet? It's that final step. It's that hoop that they have to jump through to prove they have what they need to have to be the veterinarian in the industry. So it's that third party exam, it's that oath, it's staying in good standing, and it's the continuing education. That's what makes them a professional. And so you can hold your head up high and explain to them, I actually jumped through all the same hoops that you did. No, we're not trying to compare the education ahead of time as being equivalent, but we are going to compare the hoops because the hoops meet the same standard. Continuing education allows for renewal every 3 years. Don't know why that went that way. Sorry. This is the humane pet care statement. So if you're going to be PACCC certified, you are going to say that you vow to deliver skillful, safe, conscientious, compassionate care to all animals entrusted to me, being constantly attentive to their security, safety, and well-being, and placing their welfare above all other considerations, to uphold the principle of doing no harm to the animals under my care, and to ensure that every animal under my care returns home more or at least as physically and behaviorally sound in body and spirit as when it arrived. The integral thing about that is there is absolutely nothing dirty about the word profit. Profit is not a bad word. It only is if it comes at the expense of the pets in your care. And I would suggest that if you're sitting on this webinar and you work with Beth, you work with Kuranda, that you can actually make that statement. You already live and abide by that statement. So go ahead and do the final step of the way. Let's get PACCC certified. Ta-da! There we are.
We actually had a couple more questions about the ratios conversation.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah. So one of the questions was if that applied to just daycare or also in boarding where dogs are kind of kept individually a little bit more often.
Yep. Yep. So what we have seen, so it hasn't been published yet, but in Massachusetts, our understanding is that it will be facility wide. So if there is 150 pets in a facility, then there would have to be 10 people within that facility. If there were then 150 left the building and were outside, then there would have to be 10 outside. And so, right, that particular staff to pet ratio is the total. Now, in some of the states, we are then seeing where they're talking about group size. And so when you start looking at group size, so some of them go so far as to then talk about groups. So then they're saying, okay, well, when you've got a group of dogs outside, this is how big your group can be, or this is the ratio of people that you need to have if you're going to have that many dogs, say, in one group. It is not clear. We have not seen the full documentation for Massachusetts, so I don't know. My understanding is that that would be during operational. So when there is movement and activity within the building, so they're not saying that there would have to be 10 24/7. So that's where an awful lot of it. And so that's where you can see either we'll see the legislation or the draft policy. We can see it sometimes getting held up before publish because somebody's asking those questions and saying, oh, okay, well, wait a second. What does that look like when? And that's why it's important to have people from within the industry there when that is being drafted, because otherwise what will happen is that gets published and it's 15 to 1, just says 15 to 1. Doesn't qualify it. There's no context to it. Is it overnight? Is it total? Is it group? What is it? And then it goes down to implementation. And so now you're arguing about implementation. How will this be applied?
Yeah,
So
because some of those
right now,
scenarios are a lot different.
yeah, exactly. So and that's where, truthfully, that's where we often see veterinarians kind of getting into play, because they they're not seeing it. For them it's very, very different. If they've got 20 pets in overnight, unless they run an actual boarding facility in addition to their clinic, right? But if they consider themselves boarding, certainly in Ontario, we've got a lot of vets that board. I have a vet is a regular client of mine, and he does boarding, but his dogs come to me all the time.
Mhm.
And when I first took over, I actually asked him one time, I said, please don't stop. I'm not criticizing you, but please tell me, why is it that your dogs come to me, oops, when you've actually got your own facility? Like, how does you're employing people to do this, so what is this? And his response was, well, my pets aren't sick.
Interesting. Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
So, if we've got vets sitting on these committees and doing a lot of, a lot of this policy writing, from what perspective are they coming from? Are they coming from the fact that, well, yeah, in my experience, oh my God, yeah, 10, one person for every 15, like, thinking of it as a vet tech, that's hustling, right? That could be hustling if you've got that many patients. Well, these aren't patients.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
And if
yes.
you need that staff for dogs and runs, then all of a sudden your payroll is a lot higher than it really
Right, your
probably needs
payroll
to
is
be.
your payroll is huge. The
Yeah.
15 to 1, as I say, North Carolina, that's what was written. 10 to 1 is what it has evolved to. So in North Carolina, if you've got 100 dogs at your facility during the day, then you better have 10 people in the building. Now, you do get away with counting your receptionist, your phone people, your manager, what have you. But still, it is a 10 to 1. 15 to 1 is what we're seeing. Um, a lot of it rolling out to. We could see other numbers. Absolutely, we could see other numbers. And, certainly from my perspective of being with PAC, we reflect the standards of the industry. We reflect best practice. It's not up to me. I'm just a vote, one of many. It's not up to me to say what that is. And so the feedback that we're getting from everybody, and we're getting from our trade association, we're getting from everywhere else, there is that 15 to 1 is seen as best practice. Now, what's interesting is I think that 15 to 1 is coming from a daycare perspective, and
That was
not
my
from,
first thought was
right?
just,
And
when you
not
have dogs out playing together, you need,
exactly, and not from a boarding perspective.
yeah,
Um, but that 15 to 1 seems to be being applied across the board.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if something changes, how do business owners even know that now they are required to have that ratio?
So if they weren't aware of the process, they weren't part of the process, when it becomes standard, they will know either because that inspector will show up at their door
Mhm.
and let them know.
And at that
Um,
time, would they be fined if they weren't compliant, or are they just coming to
so
tell them?
yeah, in practice, we see that there is an adoption period, and so most are going to get communication from the department, either mail, if they're registered in any other way, email. Because what's going to happen is they're going to part of it always is licensing. So the first part of the process is going to be getting licensed.
Mhm.
And so that will be you providing the documentation, the questions, answering, etc. And then there's going to be the inspection to see, okay, do you abide by these various things that you've said yes to in your license application, and it would go from there. So there is time to adopt. How much time is going to vary, right? And some states will, and provinces, etc., will potentially put in place some or recognize a level of grandfathering. The grandfathering, where it has happened, has been more about physical structure and has not been about practice.
Mm-hmm.
That tends to be something that they don't grandfather.
Yeah. Well, and I know it's probably a little easier, or maybe not easy, but
Yeah.
less invasive to alter practice rather than a structure,
That's
especially when
that's
you have to deal with
that's
zoning and permits and
Yeah,
some of those things too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the theory. Having said all of that, when we start talking about ratios, when we start talking about training, when we start talking about, because once again, there are a number of them that are actually giving feedback, and giving guidelines slash rules on those group sizes.
Mhm.
So when they do have access to each other, in a group setting, they're giving, giving feedback about numbers. The implications for a business, if your business model is built on certain numbers, certain ratios, if you're all day play, and so you're all day play, and so to accommodate this many dogs, they are together all day long, because where else would you put them? What else would you do? To start reducing those sizes, you're going to have to look at different models of how you're going to deliver that daycare or those vacations or those services. And, that takes time, because you're now selling something completely different to your pet parents. Your training needs for your staff are potentially a different, just logistically, how are you going to do it, etc. It has the potential to completely upend your business model.
Mhm.
And so it's one of the reasons why you really do have to look at what is the trend, what is happening, what are the types of rules that are being, because the fact is every region and every jurisdiction wants to, no, we're special, and wants to write their own. But they all end up, there's that drift. You get that drift. You get that. It's kind of like osmosis. And, oh, well, Massachusetts did this. Well, we'll start there.
Mhm.
What did they do? And then they go and they fine tune. And it's not often that they loosen
Mhm.
from what their neighbor did.
Mhm. Yeah. Interesting.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. I don't know if anybody else has any questions that they'd like to ask, or if there's any local legislation that they're dealing with that they'd like to discuss.
Yeah, love to hear about it. Love to hear about it, and we can see how we can lend a hand, etc. Um, I had alluded to, what's going on in Europe, and in Europe, they're currently working on. So if you look at Germany, Germany actually recognizes kennel attendant as it's a designated profession. And so there's, state recognized, government recognized apprenticeship to be a kennel attendant. And in Belgium, the European Union, where they meet, the EU is actually looking at putting together criteria to put across the EU for the people working as kennel attendants. So they will actually mandate that you have to take a course. The course will have to look like this. They'll probably then have state boards, so they will have that third party, certification, that will. You will get your education from wherever, and you will have to sit that. And so it will be mandated that if you are going to work in the industry, you will have to have that. So that's the direction Europe's going.
Do you want to take a second and explain a little bit about PAC for those who
Mm,
might not be familiar and like are there
absolutely.
levels of certification?
Absolutely, yeah. So the thing about PAC and the thing to understand is that we're not an association. So an association, you pay your fee, you get to be a part of it, you share ideas, you share practices, education. The association acts on your behalf. They're a voice for you. Um, PAC is the board that certifies. So, 11 years ago, PAC was formed by a huge group. And when I say a huge group, there were two principal, founders who spearheaded everything, but over 60 industry professionals, so long-standing providers of pet care, all got together, sat on the various committees to say, okay, we want to have a profession. We want to be a recognized profession. And it was motivated. There were two sort of really big driving factors behind that motivation. One was, how do I stand out as a professional compared to that guy over there?
Mhm.
So it was a differentiator. How do I differentiate myself from that guy over there? And certainly, if we all think about, the internet, I it's amazing what you can sell on a website. There are facilities that I've visited their website and I've been, holy, and I'm envious. I'm green. That looks amazing, right? Oh, look at what they do, their description of everything. And then I go and I visit and I'm like, wow, they had a really good website developer.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you look at it from the point of view of a pet parent, how does a pet parent, it can be very, very, very difficult. And as our society, we're so much more mobile. People don't have necessarily the close relationships with their neighbors. They haven't lived where they live for extended periods of time, etc. And so how do you find out? Some absolutely, they'll go and they ask their vet, etc. But nowadays, what do? You search the internet. So how do you stand out as being different? And the other sort of big motivator was, quite honestly, comparing themselves to other professions. It was, they found themselves sitting back, and uh, as they realized, we respect, and please don't think that I come down, or I'm coming down negative on our veterinarians. My start in the industry was in the veterinary world. So I certainly, I love my veterinary partners. I couldn't be in business without them. That's for sure. Having said that, I also recognize that the skill set that I've developed and the knowledge bank that I've developed is very different from theirs. And when I recruit from veterinary clinics and I recruit veterinary assistants or RVTs to come work within my business, the learning curve it's huge. It is huge. And because they realize that what they do is incredibly different from what we do, and it is a different knowledge base. And sometimes we all know those vets out there where it can be a little bit hard getting them to understand that I'm a professional too. It's not you and me,
Mhm.
where I'm going to defer to you on medicine,
Mhm.
but maybe you should defer to me on behavior.
Mhm.
Just saying. And so that was another big motivator. And so they sat down and they said, so what makes a professional? What is the legal definition of a professional? So they looked at it and they said, okay, so what's the definition? People who get the letters after their name, what is that? And so they looked at it and they realized that the only thing that was missing from those three things was the exam at the front of it to prove they had the knowledge they needed to have to provide professional pet care. They were already abiding by a code of ethics and standards and morals that they had self imposed on themselves and with their own businesses. So they were already doing that part. And they were doing continuing education. They were active in staying ahead, staying current, expanding their knowledge base, and doing the same thing for their staff. So the only thing that they needed was to do that upfront exam. So those 60 people got together, they sat down, they worked out, and the biggest and most arduous thing was to come up with that broad base of knowledge. What are we going to test people on? So they got together and they agreed on this is the body of knowledge. And so there's a provider level, the provider, and I say level, one is not better than the other. They're just different. So the provider is intended for the individual whose day-to-day job is hands-on with the pets. The entry level, so the prerequisite in order to write the exam is to have hands-on worked professionally, so employment within the industry for at least 3.5 months. And if they've done various training, what have you, then potentially they should be able to write the exam. Okay, so that's the provider. So they worked out what is all of the areas, what does everything need to know? So disinfecting. So it's not what is your policy or what is your procedure for disinfecting? What's the science behind disinfecting? Why do you remove the solid first before you actually disinfect? Things like that, applying a leash, signs of distress, signs of resource guarding, the appropriate normal temperature range for a dog. If you don't know what the normal temperature is, how would you ever be able to spot the abnormal? Mm-hmm. So just the broad spectrum of knowledge. So that's provider. I believe it's the majority hands-on pet care and a little bit of employment expectations. Then there was the manager, and the manager exam, once again, it's not necessarily that it's better than the other one. It's different. And so it serves two purposes, having the manager exam. One purpose is that if you have somebody who their day-to-day is part hands-on, but a little bit of man management, a little bit of customer service, then they might feel more comfortable and a little bit less daunted writing that manager exam because that's what their day-to-day life looks like. But it serves the secondary purpose of it can be hierarchy or it can be a career progression to move on to getting your manager certification. And then the third one that we have is the operator. And so the operator, that's who runs the show. A lot of people will call it the owner. Yes, we've got a lot of facilities out there where the operator is the owner. I don't like to use owner because it's not relevant. It's, if you have a general manager, then potentially they're the operator. And so that still has pet care, but it's less. So less number of questions and a few more questions on all these other different areas. Once again, allows for career progression, but also just gives you something that that maybe identifies with your day-to-day. The most important thing about PACCC for me, you have to have the exam because there has to be a qualifier. That's the end of. You just have to have that. That to me is not the be all and end all. I see the exam as being, when our industry gets to the stage where you have those cowboy operators who, maybe don't seek out education, maybe who have sat back and said, I've been doing this for this long. I know what I'm doing. You don't have to have any of this to start a business. I've known dogs. I've had dogs my whole life. I'm a cat person. I understand cat behavior. And they don't need to get the education. Well, as others around them are certified, then market pressure is going to force them because pet parents are going to be looking for, well, I only want to go somewhere where they have board certified personnel. So they'll be forced to. The exam, I think at that stage is going to be kind of neat because guess what? We're going to force those people to actually bone up. They're going to have to learn some stuff that they hadn't bothered to learn before, and that will influence and change their practices. But the exciting thing is that now to keep that certification, they have to abide by a code of ethics and morals. To be a third-party certification, there has to be a public registry. So there's a public registry. Everyone's listed. To stay on that list, you're in good standing. Um, and once again, good standing means you abide by the code of ethics and morals. So it's not about us telling you how to do your business. Is it about, PAC? If we were to get a complaint, we would have to investigate based on the code of ethics and morals. That's what we would investigate. And so we have a gentleman who was found guilty of violating the humane pet care portion of the statement, and he is struck off. And so it's publicly there, certified directory. You can see he's struck off. Now, right now, at the stage that our profession is in, you can be convicted of cruelty to animals, and nothing stops you from working in the industry. Right? You just move to a different area. And we hope that market pressure will prevent you from operating. But that's all we can rely on. So with our medical profession, with our veterinary profession, our legal profession, massage therapists, for heaven's sakes, there's a place that we can go and we can look and we can say, oh my God, oh no, they've been struck off. Shoot, I'm not going to them. Right. And so, that's something that our industry needs. So that, to me, the code of ethics and morals, getting everybody to sign up for that, for there to be accountability, and to get everyone to commit to continuing education. That's what excites me about PAC. I don't see the exam as being something that we're not trying to trick people. Right? The exam is not set up to fail. All the questions are written by industry professionals. So what happens is a question is written, form is filled out with the documentation and the background and the published source of this information. That gets submitted to Professional Testing Corporation, the third party that we use. And PTC actually goes over the question from a technical standpoint to make sure that it meets the international standards for a psychometrically evaluated test, i.e., multiple choice, and you haven't accidentally, in the construction of the question of the wording, eliminated, one of the answers. It's obvious by the question that answer is not right. Well, you can't do that because now you've changed the odds to being 1 in 3 instead of 1 in 4, et cetera. So there's rules and regulations from a technical standpoint. So PTC takes everything, makes sure that it technically fits, and then turns around, and a committee, and it's a changing committee, it's an evolving committee of certified professionals from your industry sit down and review all of those questions to make sure, does that make sense? Is that accurate? Is it current? Is it prescient, etc.? And then, if approved, it goes into the bank. And when they put together an exam, PTC scoops out the questions that they need, builds an exam, a separate committee, and the committee is made up of volunteers. We have to have a good representation every time from around the country, and those volunteers will go over the individual exam as a group, and we'll say, okay, does that make sense? Oh, actually, those 2 questions, yeah, they're pretty much the same. So let's lose one of those. Let's get another one. This exam accidentally is a little bit too heavily weighted on this area, and there's not enough covering this. Exam is built. It gets published with PTC. PTC issues will have the exam then. You decide, I want to become professionally certified. So you go to the website, you follow the links. First thing you do, you download the exam handbook, which has the pledge that you're going to make. And it has the body of knowledge, so the content outline. This is all the stuff that you will have questions on, so that you can see. You register, and when you're registering with PTC. And so that's the financial relationship, is with Professional Testing Corporation. And so you register to take the exam. You pick your window. We have 2 windows a year, May and November. And so you will pick your window. You don't pick your exact date. You just pick your window. And you apply. You will put together the documentation that you need to be approved to write the exam. So If you're doing provider, your proof of 3.5 months or more of being within the industry. You'll put that together. You'll hold on to that because PTC does random checks of people who've applied. So you'll have it ready just in case you're one of the ones who get random checked. And if you don't get the random check, then the first thing that you'll get from them will be an email saying you've been approved to write the exam, and all of the instructions and information there about how you're going to pick your exact date and time and location to go write your exam. There are Prometric locations all over North America, multiple in cities. Everywhere seems to be very, very well covered. Even in little rural Ontario, Canada, I had one. It was 45 minutes away, but there was one. It's a location you'll go, you'll sign in, you'll have your legal ID, you'll leave your phone and everything and whatnot in a locker. You'll go, you'll sit at a computer, and, a few feet away at another computer, there will be some guy or lady writing the exam to qualify radiology.
Hmm. That's incredibly thorough. I had no idea that it was
Mm.
so intensive, and I didn't even
Yeah,
know that there were groups that would go through all the questions to make sure that they are being
yeah.
worded properly, which is it's an important part of
It
any
is.
test.
It is. We needed there's international standards on to be called one a third party certification. There's all of that, but there's also then the extra set of standards. PAC has not yet done it. It's not appropriate at this stage in the life cycle of our industry, but there will come a time when, just like say a veterinarian, it becomes a protected title
Mhm.
and a protected designation, and you have to that you're everything about the process and the ongoing relationship, afterwards, once somebody is accredited, the directory, all of that. There's standards of what you have to live up to. ANSI is the American Naming Standard Index, which is the the rules, and ANSI updated its standards so that it follows the ISO, so the international standards, and so we follow those international and ANSI standards. So which is huge from the point of view of government, because one day when they do start turning around, because I'm not going to say it's going to be in the next 20 years. I don't know what the timeline will be. I know it will happen. Definitively it'll happen. When it does, then the PAC certification will be 100% to standard and be recognized.
That'd be a huge resource. That is a huge resource that I don't think pet parents know that they have is once there's enough, standard certifications and people understand to look for those certifications,
Yeah,
then they have recourse if somebody is not adhering to that code of ethics. They can,
huge.
they have a little bit of leverage where right now it's, I guess they would just call the local police. I don't even, yeah.
Absolutely. What do people do? They end up going to the press. That right in the absence of, they go to the press, and that starts a whole other procedure. And it's very, it. Well, at the end of the day, if something awful happens, there is nothing that can be, gratifying about it. What have you? But the justice. Yeah, the sense of the loss of justice is absolutely huge. From a business perspective, personally, I can say, so I got myself, I was certified first. And I thought, once I did it, I'm like, this just makes so much sense. And I get it. And I understand this. And so my manager, I got her certified, and it's actually part of my recruitment now. It's part of the offer letter. Everybody who comes to work for us is told in their offer letter about PAC certification,
Mhm.
and the expectation that at some point, they're going to have to, it will be part of their employment. If they stay with us, they will have to get PAC certified. And what that has done for my business is huge.
Yeah.
Staff retention, and
Yeah.
that's something you talk to anybody who has rolled it out at any level. It's huge. From a marketing perspective, with my pet parents, I was in a luxurious position. Like we've always been sort of for our region. We're a little bit of an industry leader for the area. But having said all of that, this just was like the cherry on top for people. It's just board certified. I don't have to educate them on PAC. All I have to do is say board certified, right? And or somebody says something about what's this PAC thing you've got all over the walls or whatever. Say, oh, that's the board that certifies for
Well,
the knowledge for
and
our
if I
industry.
was in an industry and I was a professional and I viewed myself as a professional, I would want a way to separate myself from the other bumpkin down the road who calls himself a professional but
Yeah,
is nowhere near, the experience or the expertise or the education.
yeah,
That's just a person who has had dogs for a while and maybe only a specific type of dog. And anyone who has been around dogs knows that just because you can manage this dog this way doesn't mean you're going to manage this other dog that way. But,
exactly.
I would want a way to distinguish myself. Be like, no, I actually know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a huge opportunity for an awful lot of pet care businesses right now because yeah, first exams 2016, people started getting certified. Um we still have, there are some states you can go and look at the directory. There are some states that don't have anybody certified yet. When those states come up for legislation, PAC, we're writing to the state and saying that, hey, there are, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that by the time they reach out, that we can turn around and we can say, so here's the certified professionals in your area who, have stepped forward. But we've had states where I've had to step forward. I've been to a US state, little old Jen from Canada, trying to represent a professional. Because the thing is, our trade association will always be there. So if we look at Massachusetts, IBPSA had a seat at the table. But, and their voice, because it's a group, carries a lot of weight. But there's still going to be other chairs around that table. So it's like, you know what? Let's get as many people who know what they're talking about, who live it and breathe it, to occupy those seats. So that, we don't have, as I say, Susie, who just really loves dogs, right? I love Susie. She's great, great client, but I wouldn't hire Susie.
Right. Yes. There's a big difference for
There's a
sure.
big difference, big difference. So yeah, it's business wise, promoting it. So the huge opportunity, anybody here potentially, you could be the first in your area.
Mhm.
And the thing is that, then you get to, you're marketing yourself as only,
Yes.
right? And when that changes, which we want it to, we all do, it's so much easier if the industry is here,
Mhm.
right? Like trying to explain, like try selling to pet parents where their perception and their knowledge of the industry is these providers. It's really hard to sell them this when this has been their experience, right?
That's normal. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. So if we could get everybody up and from the pets, they're safe and everybody is happy, and then you can look at your market distinction. That would be great. Well, at that point, then you get to call yourself the first.
Right.
You're not the only anymore. You're always going to be the first
Yeah.
or second or third, right? Like we're early enough in the industry that there's that. So there's a huge marketing potential. Relationships with vets. I had great relationships with a lot of my vets. There's one guy in particular who was always a little thorn in my side. And what was fascinating was he came past one day when I was explaining to his front desk staff. I was sharing a tool that we make available. And I say to everybody, you can get it off the website, print it out, make a bunch, and take them around to your local vets. Because you'll always have the vets who 100%, they turn around, they say, oh, I refer to you. You're the one I refer to. Mm-hmm. Then you have a lot of them who will say, I want to refer just to you, but it's not good for business,
right?
Right, to be seen to play favorites, and so they won't let their staff give out literature on any one particular facility. So this sheet that we have, which is an education on what to look for, and it's got a little monitoring checklist, right, of all the different things to look for and the questions to ask when you're looking at choosing a provider. And of course, PACCC's third party certification is front and center. And so I was explaining this tool to this receptionist and saying, and hey, I said, listen, talk to Dr. Moran, make sure that he's comfortable, you giving this tool out. But I said, this way, when clients ask you, you're not just saying, sorry, we can't, and sending them away empty-handed. You're giving them something that's giving them an education and empowering them on how to choose. And I had, just sort of said that when he came, what do you want my staff giving out like this? And I went, honestly, I've told them they've got to check with you. This is what it is. Went through it again with him. And he sort of stopped for a second and he goes, what's this PAC thing? He says, you've said it to me before. I looked at him and I went, I'm so sorry. You don't necessarily, I said, that's the board that certifies me. So I said, your license exam. I said, my exam. So the exam that I took so that I can put CPACO after my name. And he sort of stopped and he looked at me and he goes, oh, we have that? I'm like, yeah, we do. Yeah. We do. Absolutely. We do. I said, I have to do continuing education just like you every 3 years. I get 36 pre-approved credits. Boom. In order to. And I said, and I have to be on good standing. So I said, trust me, when I say you and I got to be on the same page here because, my professional integrity is on the line, not just from my business, but me personally, because it's my letters after my name. That guy, Dr. Moran, is not the pain in my side anymore. He sends me stuff. He sends me articles.
Yeah, because now you're a peer.
Now I'm a peer.
Yeah.
Now I'm a peer. And so that, those types of things, what that does for your business.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge.
It validates your expertise.
Really. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, as I say, clients, all you have to do is say board certified.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody gives them a massage unless they're registered.
Yeah, right? That term is ubiquitous across professionals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, so it's kind of exciting.
It is very exciting. I feel like this is a conversation like
it
everyone
could go
else
forever.
is just kind of participating, and you and I are talking about it. But yeah, it is. It's so it's complex and it feels so important, and then also like a whole other part of a job when you're managing or running your own business. It's like it's hard to prioritize everything because everything feels super important. But this is really important for the industry, not just the business.
It is. And the thing is that it's a huge opportunity, right? It's a huge opportunity rather than seeing it as a negative, rather than seeing it as this scary thing. And I know I just sort of painted a bit of a picture that maybe, did sound scary. But it doesn't have to be scary and looming over top. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to help forge the framework for a sound, healthy, agile business that supports a caring and reputable industry filled with compassion and integrity, right? There's so many opportunities there for us. Um, and, I think everybody that's here, they're still here, absolutely, PACCERT.org. Go to paccert.org, and look up that body of knowledge. We have practice exams available online. It's a short version of the test. Obviously, not the same questions, but it's a short version of the test. Gives you a bit of a feel for what it's like, and how it's pitched, etc. It can tell you. So if you look at say the manager, and there's should know this off by heart, but I think say there's 5 areas of knowledge where the questions can be pulled from on that overall body of knowledge. It can tell you, okay, this is how you scored on pet care. This is how you scored on operations. This is how you scored on management. And so it can kind of tell you, can kind of look at that and sort of say, okay, I don't need to do any research on pet care. Ooh, maybe I want to bone up a little bit and just make sure that I'm au fait with the operations. What are some of the best practices, or management, whatever. And it can sort of tell you, a little bit of where you want to do some of your research to prepare. But as I say, it's not designed to trip you up. So many, you've been working in the industry for a number of years, and you pursue continuing education. So you're participating in a webinar, you pursue continuing education, you abide ethically and morally, you can pass the exam. It's designed to keep out those who obviously didn't try to acquire any knowledge, couldn't care less,
Yeah.
and don't try to learn moving forward. That's what it's designed to keep out.
Well, I love learning more about it, and I'm
There we
excited
are.
to see both as a pet parent and then also, oh yeah, we do have another question. For the operator certification level, what are some examples of the ongoing community services?
Right. And so that's always a tough one. And so realistically, any time, so if you offer any kind of sheltering, maybe for any local charities, if you keep a percentage of your housing available for that, if you take in any, if you are active with any of local community groups, it doesn't even necessarily have to be pet related. We've had people who were part of Big Brothers, and so that's community service. So it's the idea behind the operator and that level and sort of the community service is that it's gone beyond uh, business, you
Profit.
know.
Yes. Yeah, the
Yeah,
numbers.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's sort of seeing, it's seeing the big picture, and it's seeing the place that you and your business and everything, that how every fingers go out and influence everything. So it's just looking at sort of big good standing in the community.
One of the oh, it can be either or, not both one in and out of the pet industry.
Yeah, it can be either or. So for community service, you just have to demonstrate community service.
One of the really interesting ways that some of the organizations that I interviewed when I was doing interviews for the IBI committee
Hmm.
in the last 2 years, one of them that I didn't even would never have crossed my mind that I got to learn about was a lot of the facilities that I was interviewing, they would take animals at no charge and anonymously for either domestic violence victims or for people
Mm,
going into rehab. Because
yes.
apparently, if you have a pet, it's a big reason why you would resist either seeking help if you are in domestic violence situations or going to rehab because you can't leave your pet and you have nowhere
Yep.
to bring them. So
Yep.
I thought that was incredible. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's
Isn't
not,
that
I never
amazing?
even would have thought of it, but
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
wonderful.
And if you look at the outcome, especially with rehab, if you look at the outcomes, those that have pets, those that have something waiting for them at the end, their success rate is
Mhm.
so much higher. But then, as you say, one of the things limiting their ability to access that help and care is who's going to take care of my fur baby?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of different ways that that one can be giving back. There's a lot of, I think most people probably can come up with a pet example.
Yeah.
Certainly. But at the same time, being part of, community service, um, you know, local committee that's for the greater good, so not the committee that is, small business because, hey, you're a small business. So not that.
Right.
Something a little bit more sort of community and giving back, seeing your place in the greater community is sort of how I've always thought of it and defined it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's wonderful. It's a great focal point for the industry as a whole when,
Absolutely.
it's business, yes, but the tide raises all ships. If
Absolutely.
if your priorities are aligned with the greater good, then I believe you'll be successful.
100%, right? Like, isn't that's just one of the most amazing things is, and it's, certainly in my region, I understand how, some of the players and operators in this industry, I understand how they have become closed and guarded the way, certainly a lot of them are and can be. I understand that, where I am, I can only have the kennel license. I'm not a kennel, I'm a hotel, darn it. But the kennel license, I can only have the kennel license if I live on the property. So yeah, I've got 30 acres. I have my business. I have my home. I've raised my family here. And in Canada, our protections, you're a limited company. All a limited company means is it's going to take them a couple extra months to go after you. There's no such thing as limited liability. So, something goes, my business goes south and I've lost everything. I've lost
Yeah.
my home, where my children, absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And, so many of us, we're dealing with living, breathing creatures. It's a whole other business argument how bad, as an industry we can be about, paying the business, making money, and about paying ourselves and doing all of that, where we're part of people's lives. And when you have that going on, you're not getting rich, as it were, comfortable. Well, damn it, you should be, but a lot aren't.
Yeah.
Right, a lot aren't, because of that personal nature of it all. And so as such, they become a little bit sort of cloistered and a little bit, that's the competition.
Mhm.
And it's a very adversarial competition rather than, let's work together because there's enough clients out there for all of us, because there is.
There is,
And
and it goes both ways. I think the thing that I hear at these care conferences the most is you need to charge more. You need to charge for
yes,
your services. But everyone's like, but I love my clients and I love the animals. And I'm like, I know you love it, but you're losing money caring for
right,
their animals. So it's
yeah,
both. It's like,
yeah,
on one hand, there is too much emotion and,
yes,
care and love of what they're doing, which is
yeah,
wonderful. Uh,
yeah,
but then there is also
yeah,
but I have to be able to pay the electric bill.
right, 100%. And the thing is that, depending upon where you are. So, recently, won't name names, but there was a press release. So it is in the public domain that a single operator purchased 8 franchise licenses for the greater Chicago area. And so he is about to build 8 of these pet care facilities,
Wow.
blanket Chicago, all at once. And the background of the couple who are doing that, he has grown up, and he thanks in the press release, he thanks his family because he's a middle-aged man and his professional career has been in the family business.
Mhm.
And the family business was approaching triple digits, high double digits of McDonald's. So
Wow.
they had a number of McDonald's franchises. And so, there's now going to be a lot of those operators. So those people who are in competition,
Mhm.
do I think that that bears a huge threat to those facilities in that area? Only if they don't pay attention to who else is in the marketplace. Can they all exist? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because as a franchise location, it will have a very set criteria, definition. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going for. That creates opportunity for those other ones in the area. But, pay attention and understand that that is who you will be competing for noise.
Mhm.
Very slick, very process driven, very, this is
Well
what you
funded.
get every single time. Consistency of process equals consistency of outcome,
Mhm.
all of that. And, are they going to turn around and get whatever professional qualifications are available, for their people? Yes.
Mhm. Yep.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will. So, it makes sense for a lot of us to understand that our industry is rapidly changing.
Mhm.
It doesn't have, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't have to be an all at once change, and it doesn't have to be everything. But be aware of direction, be aware of what's being considered, be aware of where things are potentially going, um, and plan accordingly.
Mhm.
Right? Be prepared. Don't be blindsided. I'm it. The legislation potential in Ontario right now, something that's going to definitively impact me, other than the rules put on me by my local municipality, it's probably, I'm going to touch wood, it's probably quite a long way off.
Mhm.
But I've already sat down and I'm talking to the manufacturers of different ventilation systems. I'm talking to the manufacturers of different types of fire suppression. I've got fire monitoring, but different types of fire suppression. Do I feel like this fire suppression is a great idea? No, I'm all about prevention,
Mhm.
but I'm looking at it because that's the direction that my legislation in my area will eventually take.
Mhm.
It's a long way off, but
Mhm.
it eventually will be. So it makes a lot of sense to do the research and plan.
Interesting. Well, given that we've been, talking about it for 2 hours, I think we'll let everybody go. But as everyone here can see, there's so much to talk about, and I posted your contact info and the pack info in the chat.
Thank you.
And I will also have the recording of this posted with all of your contact info there, and I'll email that out. So if anyone has any questions for
Perfect.
Jenn, please feel
Yes.
free to reach out to her. She's, it's so apparent, a resource that, you know, we're lucky to have here today. So
Thank you very much. That's very
thank
kind.
you.
All
And
right.
I really
Awesome.
appreciate everyone
Happy
coming.
Thanksgiving to everybody.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending.
All right now. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.